They didn't believe in ghosts, but they were about to meet an entire species of them. In the dark above the Conclave's home world, 300 human ships sat with their engines cold and their lights off, and not one alarm on the planet below had ever once gone off. Admiral Sarah Thorne stood with her hands behind her back, the way she always did, and watched a screen that showed her nothing but stars. 2 centuries. That was how long the watch had run. 2 centuries of silence, of patience, of letting a galaxy full of monsters believe they were alone at the top. The screen blinked. A new feed had opened, pulled from a relay buried so deep in conclave space that its own engineers had forgotten it existed. Audio only, for now. Thorne let it play. "The Terran world is a stove," a voice was saying, dry and amused, each word clicking faintly through mandibles. "It burns chemicals for fuel. It has not yet learned to walk between stars without bleeding into them first." Laughter followed, not human laughter. A rattling, layered sound, dozens of small plates clicking against each other in something like delight. Thorne's aide, a younger officer named Voss, stood at her shoulder and said nothing. He didn't need to. They both knew whose voice that was. High Arbiter Korthval, 8 feet of chitin and ceremony, 4 mandibles, a cowl that pulsed soft blue-green light when he was pleased with himself. He was pleased with himself often. "Pull the visual," Thorne said. The screen split. Now they could see the chamber itself. The grand spire's central hall, all black stone and cold light, ringed by delegates from a dozen member species of the hegemony conclave. At the center of it, Korthval stood at the speaker's dais, rank baton resting against one shoulder, addressing a hall that hung on his every clicking word. "Earth," he continued, "possesses no fold drive, no shield lattice, no weapon worth cataloging. And yet it sits on a debris field richer in heavy metals than any world we have charted in 900 years. A representative of the crystalline collective chimed in, voice like glass struck with a soft hammer. "You propose what, exactly?" "I propose," Korthval said, "that mercy is wasted on a species that cannot yet feel its own insignificance. Glass the surface, harvest what remains. It would be, in its way, an act of kindness. We would be ending their confusion." The laughter came again, louder this time, rolling through the chamber like something rehearsed. Voss's jaw tightened. "Admiral." "Let it run," Thorne said quietly. "Every second of it." Behind her, mounted in a recessed bracket at the command station, a small crystal pulsed with a slow violet light, faceted like a cut gem, drinking in the audio feed and storing it in a memory lattice that would never let a single syllable degrade. A simple vessel, recording the vanity of gods. It had no name beyond what it did. It only listened. On the main display, a notation scrolled past that Voss had clearly been waiting to mention. "Admiral," before this feed opened, the long-range census finished. Final numbers in. Thorne didn't turn. And 312 worlds, confirmed, colonized, catalogued, defended. He paused. "They still think it's one. 312. The Conclave's intelligence reports. The ones Korthval was no doubt quoting from right now, somewhere in that smug recitation about Earth's confusion, listed Earth as a single world. One blue dot, one species, one stove burning chemicals into the dark. The Conclave had never once looked past the first colony marker before deciding humanity wasn't worth the fuel to glass. That was the thing about contempt. It made you stop counting. Thorne let herself feel exactly nothing about that. Not yet. There would be time. "Confirm the relay's still blind to us," she said. "Confirmed. They don't know we're listening. They don't know we're here at all." Voss hesitated. "They don't know we exist past the one world they wrote down 9 years ago." "Good," Thorne said. "Let them finish the vote." On screen, Korthval raised the rank baton, and the chamber's ambient light shifted to a deeper gold, the Conclave's signal for a formal motion. "All in favor of reclassification and extraction," he said. "The floor is yours to speak it plain." One by one, the assembled delegates spoke their assent. Thorne counted 11 votes before the 12th came. A small, rust-colored representative near the back, whose voice cracked slightly with what might have been doubt, and was overridden anyway by the chamber's procedural rules before he finished his sentence. 12 for, 0 recorded against. Korthval's cowl brightened, pleased. "Then it is decided. Earth burns within the cycle. Thorne reached forward and with 2 fingers tapped a sequence into the console that had sat untouched, unused, rehearsed only in simulation, for longer than Voss had been alive. A single line of text appeared above it. Systemic eclipse, authorization pending. Her finger hovered there. Admiral, Voss's voice had gone tight. That's the protocol. That's the real one. I know what it is, Lieutenant. If you authorize that, there's no calling it back. Not in 9 hours, not in 9 years. Once it starts, the whole continuity ends right there on that word. Thorne finally turned to look at him, and for the first time since the feed had opened, something moved behind her eyes. Not anger. Not yet. Just the particular stillness of a woman who had waited a very long time for a reason, and had just been handed one wrapped in laughter. They asked for an act of kindness, she said. I'm going to give them one. She pressed her palm flat against the panel. The text blinked once. Authorization confirmed. Somewhere far above the Conclave's capital, in 300 ships that had not moved or spoken in 2 centuries, something woke up. I wish I could tell you the silence held. It didn't. And once it broke, it never went quiet again. 9 hours earlier, the Null Void watch station had been an entirely different kind of quiet, the kind built on habit, not dread. The station sat where the Uat cloud thinned into true dark, a needle of black hull wrapped in stealth lattice so dense that even its own resupply ships approached blind, guided in by encrypted beacon alone. Thorne had commanded it for 6 years. Before that, 3 other officers, each handed the same impossible job: watch the conclave, log everything, and never, under any condition, be seen. It was, by design, the most boring command in the Terran Defense Force. Most days, nothing happened at all. Today had started with coffee gone lukewarm and a maintenance report about a failing capacitor bank in Deck 4, the kind of thing that filled an admiral's morning with nothing more dramatic than a signature. Thorne had read it twice, approved the repair, and gone to check the overnight intercepts before the Conclave's day cycle began in earnest. That was when the relay flagged a session at the Grand Spire. Routine at first. The Conclave held sessions constantly, trade disputes, border quarrels between member species, the endless theater of a government that had never once been tested by anything it couldn't out-talk. Thorne almost minimized the feed 3 separate times in the first 10 minutes. It was the word Earth, spoken with that particular conclave inflection, flat, faintly bored, the tone reserved for things beneath formal concern that made her leave it open. She had heard that tone before. Every officer on this station had heard it in 100 different intercepted sessions over 100 different years, and every time the protocol was the same. Log it, archive it, do not react. 9 hours later, she had stopped logging and started counting votes instead. Voss caught up to her in the corridor outside the command deck, still pale, still holding the data slate like it might explain itself if he looked at it long enough. The fleets all reporting active status. Every ship. 300 for 300. They've been ready a long time, Thorne said. They've been ready since before I was born. He fell into step beside her. Admiral, can I ask when this started? The first watch. Did they know it would end like this? Or did they think they were just counting forever? Thorne considered the question, longer than its size deserved. I think, she said, they hoped they'd never have to stop counting. The corridor opened onto the bridge, and for a moment neither of them said anything else, because the main display had updated again, and now it showed something neither census nor patience could soften. A live tactical feed of the Grand Spire's capital, ringed by defense platforms that had stood unchallenged for 9 centuries, utterly unaware that somewhere in their own sky, the dark had teeth. Korthval never felt the eclipse start. That was the point of it. At the exact moment Thorne's palm left the panel, every communication array in conclave space received the same instruction at once, buried inside what looked, to any internal diagnostic, like a routine firmware handshake. It wasn't routine. It wasn't even conclave code. Not really. It was a key cut 2 centuries ago and never once used, waiting in dormant silence inside hardware the conclave had built with its own claws, never knowing whose hand had taught them how. The towers went dark first, then the relay stations, then, sector by sector, the entire command lattice that connected the Grand Spire to every fleet, every garrison, every border post in hegemony space simply stopped answering. On the bridge of the null void station, a counter appeared on the main display, climbing in seconds. Voss watched it the way a man watches a fuse. 17 minutes, he said. That's the window. That's the window, Thorne said. Long enough for the fleet to cross, not long enough for them to notice they've already lost. Down on the Conclave's capital. None of that mattered yet, because nobody there knew to look up. In the Grand Spire's lower archive, a records clerk named Pell, chitin a duller grey than the delegates above him, voice clipped from decades of filing motions nobody important ever read, noticed his terminal freeze mid-transfer. He tried the diagnostic twice. Both times, the screen returned the same null response. He didn't sit and stare at it. He kicked the rolling chair back, crossed the archive floor, and physically pulled the relay panel open to check the hardware himself, because that was the kind of clerk he was. Hands first, questions second. Wires intact, power steady. Whatever had taken the network down hadn't touched the metal at all. That's not a fault, he muttered, already moving toward the comm station to flag it upward. That's a door somebody closed from outside. Nobody above him was listening yet. The Grand Spire's vote had just been called. The chamber was still rich with the particular satisfaction of consensus, and Korthval was already 3 sentences into his closing remarks about the efficient harvesting timeline for a world he'd just sentenced to fire. Thorne watched the recording crystal pulse steadily on, drinking in every clicking syllable, and felt the old patience in her chest finally start to loosen its grip, one finger at a time. Fleet status, she said. All 300 holding formation, Voss reported. Cloak integrity at maximum. They could be standing in the man's own bedroom, and he wouldn't know it. Soon, he won't have to wonder. Above the capital, in orbit nobody on the surface had ever successfully mapped, the defense network's eyes went dark one platform at a time, not destroyed, not even damaged, simply told, in a language only their own builders had ever spoken to them in, to stop watching. 41 platforms, 41 blind spots opening across the sky like a curtain pulled back in sections. It was the records clerk, Pell, who reached a senior officer first, not because anyone trusted him, but because he refused to let the call drop, working his way up 3 layers of dismissal in under 4 minutes by simple, stubborn persistence. Sir, the defense net isn't reading platform feeds. Not one. Not since the calm blackout started. Then file the report, and let engineering. There is no engineering fault, Pell said. I checked the hardware myself. Someone shut our own eyes for us, from the inside. That got a pause, a long one. Bring it to the Arbiter, the officer finally said. Now. But the Arbiter was still talking. Thorne let 3 more minutes pass in silence before she gave the next order. And in those 3 minutes, nothing on her bridge moved faster than her own breathing, slow and even. The breathing of someone who had rehearsed this exact patience for longer than most of her crew had been alive. Drop the veil, she said. 300 ships, each one larger than anything the Conclave's own shipyards had ever floated. Let their cloaking fields fall away at once. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. The hulls weren't built for stealth in the way Conclave doctrine understood stealth, matte, silent, radar-dead. They were built to disappear completely. And then, the instant they chose to be seen by everyone, all at once, in a single coordinated unveiling that turned the dark sky above the capital into something closer to a second dawn. Down in the lower archive, Pell felt the floor hum before he understood why. He looked up through the narrow viewport above his station, the only one in the entire records wing, installed decades ago for reasons no one remembered, and saw the black sky fill with light that hadn't been there a breath before. He didn't drop anything. He didn't freeze. He grabbed the comm handset off its cradle and said, flat and fast, the only sentence that mattered, "Tell the Arbiter the sky is wrong. Tell him now." In the Grand Spire's central hall, the message reached a junior aide who physically pushed past 2 delegates to get to the dais, which was, by any standard of conclave protocol, an act of career suicide. He didn't care. He put the slate directly in front of Korthval's cowl and said nothing else, because the image on it said everything. Korthval looked down at it, the way a man looks at a word in a language he's only half sure he can read. Then he looked up, through the chamber's high windows, and saw it himself. 300 shapes, vast and unmistakably deliberate, arranged in a formation too precise to be anything but a message, hanging in the sky where 9 centuries of conclave astronomy had insisted nothing could hide. The laughter in the chamber didn't stop all at once. It died in pieces, delegate by delegate, as each one followed Korthval's gaze upward and found the same impossible sky. Korthval's mandibles had gone rigid, locked mid-motion, and for 3 full seconds, the High Arbiter of the Hegemony Conclave said nothing at all. Then he spoke, and his voice had lost every trace of the dry amusement it carried 20 minutes earlier. "Get me a tactical reading. Now, I want to know what that is." Nobody answered immediately, because nobody could. The chamber's own systems, the ones that should have flooded the dais with sensor data the instant anything entered conclave airspace, sat dark and useless, exactly as they'd sat for the last 17 minutes. "The network is still down," the junior aide said. "Sir, we have no instruments. We're reading this with our eyes. 300 ships, just hanging there, lit from within by something that wasn't quite light and wasn't quite fire, arranged in a pattern too deliberate to be a fleet caught in formation by accident. It looked, if Korthval let himself think it, less like an invasion and more like a verdict." Across the chamber, the crystalline collective representative made a sound none of the translation routines had a word for. It didn't need one. Every delegate in the hall understood it the same way. Far above, on the bridge of her own flagship, Thorne watched the chamber's interior feed, restored now, deliberately on her terms, through a channel she controlled rather than one they did, and gave the next order without raising her voice. "Play it." The recording crystal's contents poured into every screen, every speaker, every public channel across the capital at once. Korthval's own voice, dry and pleased, filled the chamber and the streets beyond it in the same breath. "The Terran world is a stove. It has not yet learned to walk between stars without bleeding into them first. Then the laughter. Then the vote. 12 clicked assents, 1 cut-off dissent, and Korthval's closing line about mercy, played back to a city that had not voted on anything and had never been asked. Pell, still down in the records archive, heard his own arbiter's recorded voice come out of the wall speaker above his desk and felt something in his chest go very still. He didn't reach for a calm this time. He just listened, the way 10 million other citizens across the capital were listening, to the sound of their own government deciding, casually, to murder a world they'd never bothered to look at twice. "They're not invading," Korthval said, mostly to himself, mostly too late. "They're broadcasting." "Sir," the aide's voice had dropped to something close to fear. "Sir, the fleet command grid just went green. All of it. Every garrison vessel in the home sector is reporting active navigation orders." "Whose orders?" "Not ours." Out past the capital's orbital ring, conclave warships, proud, ancient, the pride of 9 centuries of shipbuilding, began turning their noses away from the planet they were meant to guard, each one steered by a hand none of their own crews could see, toward headings that led nowhere defensible at all. Deep space, empty coordinates, a long, humiliating drift away from the only fight that mattered. It was the same dormant key that had silenced the towers, the same one that had blinded the platforms, sitting inside hardware the Conclave had designed, built, and trusted, never once asking who had taught them how to build it in the first place. On the bridge, Voss read the navigation override status off the tactical display and said the thing out loud before he could stop himself. "Admiral, that's their whole fleet. We didn't board a single ship. We didn't fire a single shot. We just told their own systems to stop listening to them. They built every console with our gift inside it," Thorne said. 2 centuries ago, when the first trade envoys came begging for fold drive technology, we gave it to them. Gladly, generously." She paused, and something almost like a smile moved at the corner of her mouth, gone again just as fast. "We just never told them what else came in the box." Voss stared at her. "That's not a defense grid. That's a leash." It always was. Down in the chamber, Korthval heard none of that conversation, but he didn't need to. He was staring at his own dark tactical slate, the one that had shown him, for 9 centuries of his species' history, exactly where every threat in known space stood, and now showed him nothing, because for the first time in that entire history, the threat had decided to stop standing where he could see it. A predator does not recognize the moment he becomes prey. He only recognizes, much too late, that the ground has already shifted underneath him. Korthval set the rank baton down on the dais. It was a small motion, almost domestic, The kind of thing a tired man does at the end of a long day before he remembers the day isn't over. "Open a channel," he said. "Direct to whoever is doing this." "Sir, we don't have working comms." They restored ours to play that recording. They can restore it again. He was right. Within seconds, a single channel blinked open on the dais console, not the Conclave's network, but a borrowed thread of it, offered like a door held open by the very hand that had locked every other one. "This is High Arbiter Korthval of the Hegemony Conclave," he said, and to his credit, his voice barely shook. "I am speaking to whoever has taken our defense network. State your demand." On the bridge of her flagship, Thorn let the silence stretch 4 full seconds before she answered, because 4 seconds, after 2 centuries, was nothing at all. "My name is Admiral Sarah Thorn, Terran Defense Force," she said, "and I don't have a demand, Arbiter. I have a correction." "A correction. You told your people Earth has not learned to walk between stars without bleeding into them first." Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. "We learned that 200 years ago. We've simply been waiting to see what you do with the silence." Korthval said nothing. Behind him, the chamber had gone utterly still, every delegate listening to a conversation that was rewriting 9 centuries of certainty in real time. "Your census lists Earth as one world," Thorn continued. "It was never one world. It hasn't been one world in longer than your conclave has existed in its current form. You stopped counting the day. You decided we weren't worth it." "This is not possible," Korthval said, and for the first time, something other than authority moved under the words. "Our technology, our defense grid, the fold corridors themselves, these are conclave achievements, refined over centuries by our own engineers." "Refined," Thorn agreed. "Not built. We gave you the seed. We've been harvesting the tree ever since." She let that sit, then added, quieter, almost gentle in a way that made it worse. "Every console in your command lattice has had our hand inside it since the day you installed it. You just never thought to ask why your gift came so easily." In the records archive, Pell listened to that exchange through the same wall speaker and found himself thinking, with a strange and sudden clarity that had nothing to do with rank or duty, of every system fault he had ever logged and dismissed as routine over 15 years of filing reports nobody senior ever read. Every one of them, he realized now, might have been a door. He just hadn't known whose hand was on the other side. Korthval's cowl had gone dark, its bioluminescence guttering down to almost nothing, the physical signature of a creature who had built his entire authority on the assumption that the universe's only predators were the ones his own species had already catalogued. "What do you want?" he said, and this time it wasn't a demand. It was closer to a question a smaller creature might ask. Thorn's answer came without hesitation, because she had carried it, unspoken, for longer than this man had held his title. "I want you to look up," she said, "and understand exactly what you're looking at." Korthval looked up. For one long breath, neither he nor anyone in the chamber said a word, and 300 ships hung in that silence like a sentence already passed. "You have a name for this," he said finally, "a reason you've waited so long to give it." "We do." Thorn's hands stayed clasped behind her back, the posture she'd held for 6 years on this bridge and longer than that in her own bones. "There's a rule older than your conclave, older than mine. You don't mark what you haven't measured." Down in the chamber, the rust-colored delegate who tried to vote against the motion and been overridden stood very still, watching his arbiter's cowl flicker and dim, and said nothing, because there was nothing left to add. Thorn nodded once, off camera, to a figure who had stood near the back wall of her own bridge for the entire exchange, silent until now. "Arbiter," she said, "I'd like you to meet someone who's been closer to your government than you ever let yourself imagine." The man who stepped forward onto the open channel's visual feed wore conclave formal dress, the kind issued only to accredited Terran liaisons, the kind Ambassador Daniel Harrison had worn into that grand spire for the better part of a decade, smiling through every committee meeting, nodding through every dismissal of his own species as a chemical-burning curiosity. He didn't smile now. He simply let his collar fall open, just enough to show the thin silver line at his throat, the same make, the same matte finish as the implant behind Thorn's left eye. "I've sat in your sessions for 9 years, Harrison said. "I voted on your trade panels. I drank your ceremonial wine and told you how grateful Earth was for the privilege of your attention." He let that land. "I was never your guest, Arbiter. I was your audit." Korthval's mandibles parted, but no sound came out. In the records archive, Pell stood with the calm handset still in his hand, and for the first time all day, instead of reaching for it again, he simply set it down. There was nothing left to report. The report had walked in and introduced itself. Above the capital, the formation of human ships began, slowly, to move, not toward the planet, not in attack, but outward, spreading into a wider lattice across the visible sky. Running lights shifting from cold blue-white to a deep, deliberate gold that turned the dark above the spire into something that looked, for one brief and terrible minute, like a second sun rising in the wrong direction. No invasion, no bombardment, no mercy granted and none demanded. Just the sky itself, rearranged, so that every citizen of the capital who stepped outside that morning would look up and see exactly what their leaders had spent a single laughing afternoon deciding to provoke. Thorn watched the formation lock into place and allowed herself, finally, the smallest measure of something that wasn't quite satisfaction. It was closer to the end of a held breath. "Arbiter Korthval," she said, "you're going to stand in front of your conclave and you're going to tell them what you told me, that you mistook patience for absence, that you mistook silence for weakness." She paused, and when she spoke again, each piece landed separate and plain, the way a verdict does. "You did not find a stove that hadn't learned to walk. You found a guardian who'd been walking beside you the whole time and chose, every single day, not to step on you." In the chamber, the words moved through the hall like something physical. Delegate after delegate lowered their gaze, not from him this time, but from her. Korthval set the rank baton down again, fully this time, laid flat on the dais rather than resting against his shoulder, and the gesture meant exactly what it looked like. "What happens now?" he asked. "To me. You'll face your own people's justice," Thorn said. "We're not interested in running your government. We're interested in making sure it never makes this particular mistake again." She let the silence breathe once more before adding, "Justice Minister Tors will be arriving within the day to open formal proceedings. Genocide doesn't go unanswered, because the species you tried to erase happened to survive long enough to object." Behind Korthval, the rust-colored delegate finally spoke, his voice rough with something between fear and relief. "There will be a trial." "There will be a trial," Thorn agreed. Korthval said nothing else. He simply stood there, 8 feet of chitin and ceremony, the bioluminescence of his cowl reduced to a dim, guttering pulse, looking less like an arbiter and more like what he had always been underneath the title, a creature who had never once had to imagine being the smaller thing in the room. Far across the capital, in a quiet residential tier, a young conclave clerk in training named Z3 stepped out onto a balcony she rarely used, drawn by neighbors murmuring in the street below, and looked up. She had grown up being told her species sat near the top of a settled, ordered galaxy, that the unclaimed dark beyond conclave borders held nothing worth fearing, because everything worth fearing had already been catalogued, named, and filed away. She looked up now at a sky full of gold-lit shapes that had never once appeared in any catalogue she'd been taught, and felt something she had no formal word for, because her people had never needed one before today. She did not pray exactly. She had never been taught how, but she stood very still, the way a smaller animal goes still when something larger walks past it for the first time, and hoped, without quite knowing what she was hoping toward, that whatever mercy her own government had refused to extend might somehow still be extended to her. The ships did not answer her. They simply held their places, patient, gold, and unhurried, the way they had held their places for 200 years before anyone on her world had known to look. By the time the formal proceedings opened, 3 days later, the recording crystal had been moved from Thorn's Bridge to a converted annex inside the grand spire itself, repurposed, at Justice Minister Tor's request, into something it had never been built to be. It no longer simply listened. Now it played on command, into a chamber built for judgment rather than mockery. Every word the conclave's leadership had spoken about a world they'd never bothered to send a single scout to verify. Tors, a compact woman with the kind of patience that made junior staff nervous, set the crystal into its new housing herself rather than delegate the gesture to an aide. "A simple vessel, recording the vanity of gods," she said, half to herself, reading the old line off the original intake log. She looked up at the assembled conclave delegates, none of whom met her eyes for long. Let's see what it plays back now. The violet light pulsed once, then steadied into something closer to white, and the first recorded testimony of the trial began. Pell sat near the back of the gallery, no longer a records clerk filing motions nobody read, but a witness whose stubborn 4-minute climb through 3 layers of dismissal had become, in the official record, the first documented internal warning that something had gone wrong. He hadn't asked for that. He hadn't expected it. He simply sat with his hands folded, listening to his own small act of persistence read back to him in a stranger's formal voice, and felt, for the first time in 15 years of filing, that something he'd done had actually mattered. Outside the spire, in the wide plaza where citizens had once gathered to celebrate trade victories and territorial expansions, the gold-lit ships still held their slow formation overhead, neither leaving nor descending, a permanent fixture in a sky that would never again look unguarded. Admiral Sarah Thorne did not attend the trial herself. She had no interest in watching a government dismantle its own myths in public. That work belonged to the people who'd have to live inside the wreckage afterward. She remained on the bridge of her flagship, hands behind her back, watching the formation hold its quiet, patient shape above a city that had finally learned to look up. Voss found her there at the end of the 3rd day, and for once, he didn't have a status report to deliver. 200 years, he said, and it ends with you saying maybe 40 words to him. It didn't end with the words, Thorne said. It ended the moment he decided laughter was cheaper than looking. She turned from the display, and on the console behind her, in the bracket where the recording crystal had once sat, there was only an empty housing now, the violet light gone with it, sent down to the spire to do its new work. She didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. Somewhere below, in a sky finally honest about what it held, the ships kept their watch, patient as they had always been, and said nothing at all.